Big time banger of a main event, and luckily I had the opportunity to be there for the first one. As always, one half of your hosting duo, Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. With me as always, Matt Allen. You can find him on the socials at Matt Allen FNP. And as always, we're going to be talking about this fight all week. You're going to find it on Early Stoppage. You're also going to find it on Fight Night Picks !Kicks this Saturday, live 2 hours before the prelims. And as it's a pay-per-view, we're also going to have the Fight Companion as well. So really looking forward to that content. But Matt, getting it back into our main event, we have a rematch where at UFC 220, you had gold all over the place. The co-main event, Daniel Cormier, Volkan Oezdemir. In the main event, you had Miocic and Ngannou won. And the issue in that fight was you saw the meteoric rise of Francis Ngannou, just knocking people out left, right, and center. Absolutely unrivaled power. They're going to tell you about that all week. He has the hardest punching power of any single person alive. What is it that they use? It's like a Ford Escort. It's like a 12-pound sledgehammer all the way down. That's how hard this guy hits. For Stipe in that fight, well, he's got a good wrestling base, and he has great boxing fundamentals, and those are ultimately what won out in that fight. Now, he did absorb some of Ngannou's power, and he ate it like, I don't know, a bagged lunch at a fire hall. He was able to do quite well with that. So, bear all that in mind, and in that fight for Stipe, again, the pressure and the pace he was able to put on, and the takedowns ultimately won out. And for a guy there with his friends, sitting up in the nosebleeds with Matt Bissett's family of all people, there were a lot of Bissett fans there, everybody was just so in awe of the fact that Ngannou could shut Stipe's lights out. Even if he was tired, he could do it in the later rounds. And for Stipe, he could just grind out a win. Again, ultimately, Stipe ground out a win, absorbed a little bit of punishment. But you come into this fight, and you look at the career trajectories. For Stipe, fought Cormier a few times. His last time out, picks up a huge win. For Francis, he fights Derek Lewis not that long after, and it was a weird one. And listen, ultimately he lost out one of the most boring fights that you're ever going to see. But after that, he took a different approach to his career. We're going to sports psychologists. We're going to work through these issues. And holy smokes, back again, Francis Ngannou knocking guys out. So for Ngannou, he's added little wrinkles into his game. We've seen, is the takedown defense an issue? Well, nobody really gets to test it because he knocks you out before you get to find out. And for him as well, a lot of sites might still have him listed as MMA Factory. A lot of people might say, oh, well, he still trains with Cyril Gahn. And no, sirree Bob. Doesn't train at MMA Factory anymore. Ferdinand Lopez and Francis are no more. They are definitely on the outs. France has been in Extreme Couture for quite some time, working out a little bit at the PI too. Why not? I mean, free food, free gym.
It's the best version of Francis that we've seen too.
That's the thing. So you have 100% Francis coming into this fight, or we assume, and you have Stipe who, he's battled injuries in the past. We don't really get to hear much about him, and that's a weird thing too. Before the pandemic, Stipe was kind of those guys like, is he a star? Because he's the best heavyweight we've ever seen, but is he a star? No. Well, they try and put him into opportunities, and he talks like a guy who's got a bag of marbles in his mouth. And then he's in Modelo commercials, and now the pandemic hit. He's still a firefighter. He's still working his 9 to 5. We haven't really heard much out of Stipe.
Stipe Miocic, just a straight-up good guy by all accounts, so good on him for helping his community in Cleveland. For Stipe, this is such an important fight because I do think he's cemented himself as the greatest heavyweight of all time. I don't think there's much of a pushback on that because a lot of people who thought the greatest heavyweight of all time was Fedor have kind of aged themselves out of the sport. And a lot of people who watch MMA now probably aren't as familiar with what Fedor did back in the day and are more familiar with what Fedor is doing now. I don't know what that face is for because I haven't said anything.
Knocking out Rampage Jackson?
Ooh. Stipe's the greatest heavyweight of all time, and his level of competition really does show that. You lost to DC, who is another one of the greatest fighters of all time. And then you don't only come back and reinvent yourself, you come back and reinvent your body. And that's a really big talking point that I don't think enough people are talking about in this fight. Stipe, after that first DC fight, dropped 11 pounds, I believe it was, and then he did look a lot leaner in the third fight as well. If that's the Stipe who shows up to fight Francis, I think it's the best thing going for him. I actually think the smaller Stipe can be in this fight is going to be the biggest advantage. And a lot of people would think of it as the opposite way. Oh, you're fighting Francis. He's so big. You want to try to match his strength with your strength. Not at all. No matter what Stipe Miocic does, he will never be the pure power puncher that Francis Ngannou is. And there's no problem with that whatsoever because Miocic already has insane pop on his shots. It's not like he's some pillow-fisted heavyweight. But if Stipe focuses more on speed than power, it's going to give him an even bigger advantage. Because if you go back and watch that first fight, Francis does land shots, don't get me wrong, but a lot of the shots that Francis lands are when Stipe is in range trying to land his own shots. And once Stipe kind of realizes that I can't fight this guy like I'm fighting another fighter, I have to fight him like he's a bear. And it's weird to say that because there's a few defensive moments where Stipe doesn't really do what you would expect from an MMA fighter. He's just getting his body out of the way of Francis's shots. And I understand that's a bit of a weird statement to make, but go back. When Francis is throwing those big looping straights, Stipe does a good job of getting his head out of the way and then separating, but it's not in the most traditional sense. It's not like he's just moving his head out of the way, you're missing by a couple inches, and then he's there to counter. He's just making sure he's out of the range of Francis because he realized that, yeah, that first round might suck, and a little bit of the second round might suck too. But Stipe's got, I don't even want to say good heavyweight cardio. Like, Stipe could fight middleweights and probably outlast a lot of them in the 5th round because he does have a great gas tank. He's got a great knowledge of the sport, too. And I don't think fight IQ is something that gets brought up enough when you talk about Stipe because, again, he sounds like he's on SWAT people. If he was out there shooting alligators and I don't really know what they do in that show. I just remember they killed a lot of alligators. They did have subtitles, though, and it was an English-speaking show. Stipe could have those, but his fight IQ is through the roof, and his in-fight adjustments are very important to bring up. And I know what everyone goes back and talks about is the DC fight. Well, let's break that fight down. Round 1, gets taken down and dominated on the mat. It's basically a 10-8 for DC. Round 2, very back and forth. Both guys throwing good strikes, but Stipe's able to defend the takedown. Round 3, able to defend more takedowns. Stipe's starting to come on a little bit. And when that 4th round, what Craig just showed, when he starts landing that lead hook to the body, you can tell DC's like, oh, I didn't really expect this. And Stipe goes back to the well over and over and over again. And the great thing about body shots is that, yeah, you might not put a guy down with the first one that you throw, but they're going to drop his hands. And they're going to drop his hands a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And stuff like that, you don't see guys fight like Stipe on the prelims, you know? And it's not like on the prelims they're lesser fighters. It's just, Stipe is the greatest of all time for a reason. He has the skill set to match. Francis doesn't have the greatest skill set in the world. It's just the truth. And breaking down this fight is a lot similar to breaking down Derek Lewis' fight. How good can Stipe Miocic defend his head until Francis lands on him? Or can Francis land in the first place? And last thing for me, and then I'll let you take off. Go back and watch the Rosenstrike fight with Francis, because just those 20 seconds are all of Ngannou's, it's basically his whole career in one 20-second spurt. He throws massive windmill punches, misses 6 of them. Jairzinho does everything right, stays on the inside, keeps everything compact, counters, lands a really nice inside leg kick, and you're like, wow, wait, Jairzinho fighting great going backwards. And then Francis lands one left hook. And Jairzinho goes limp. And you're probably like, oh, well, that fight's over, right? But here's the thing. In MMA, if the ref's not right there, you can land a couple clean ones. And Francis lands like 4 of the most disgusting punches up against the cage that you're ever going to see. And I think we're going to see the same version of Francis. If he lands on Stipe, will he put him to sleep? Probably. If Stipe stays really compact and defensively sound, can he win this fight? Yes. But again, Francis Ngannou has that sort of nuclear launch code where if he hits you with one punch, it can be the left hand or the right hand, he's going to put you to sleep.
If you look at Francis Ngannou's overall career, let's just go through the UFC. Beats Luis Enrique, knocks him out. Beats Curtis Blades, finishes him. Beats Bojan Mihajlovic, finishes him. Beats Freight Train Hamilton. Kimura, just a meathead submission. Beats Andre Arlovsky, knocks him out. Knocks out Alistair Overeem, one of the most disgusting uppercuts you've ever seen. Gets a title shot, loses. Fights Derek Lewis, boring. Knocks out Curtis Blades again, disgusting. And it's really weird knockout too. Disgusting. Finishes Cain Velasquez. Now, did his knee give out? I don't think it did. He knocked him out, and it was gross. Finishes JDS. Glass Cannon, finishes Jairzinho Rosenstrike. Not easy to do. Handed Jairzinho his first loss. Now, was Jairzinho coming off a fight against Alistair Overeem where maybe he lost and maybe he won?
I mean, he looked good.
Well, he looked good at the end, so it is what it is. Francis finished him in 20 seconds. You have, again, you can't talk about it enough. If Mike Tyson's ranting and raving over you, you're probably pretty good. And we've talked about this before. If those icons of the sport know your name, then that's a great thing. Dana White was on Mike Tyson's podcast here in the last couple of weeks. It was a really short episode. It was only like 25 minutes or 31. It was really short. But they brought up Francis Ngannou. It was him and his co-hosts that were like, hey, what about that Ngannou guy with the UFC? Mike knew enough to talk about him. It's just like Joe Rogan a few weeks ago at the last pay-per-view go, Uroš Medic is a guy you need to watch. Before the fight, and I thought, oh boy, this isn't good. If Rogan's talking about this, could be really bad. And Medic goes out there and puts on a clinic, and then they have that back and forth. Ngannou's one of those guys too, and he's lived up to that. I know he's lost his title fight, but he's one of those guys that's must-see TV. And if you're watching now, hey, thanks for still tuning in. It's because this guy. We're great, but it's because of this guy. So for Ngannou, you'd have to expect. If he's going to win, he finishes Stipe. For Stipe, could be another decision. He could grind one out.
Isn't it wild that Francis is the favorite, too? Again, we've seen this fight play out once before, and it wasn't that competitive. And yes, Francis landed shots. I shouldn't say it wasn't that competitive. Francis did have his moments, don't get me wrong. But just if you look at the scorecards at the end, you're like, Stipe beat the shit out of Francis. But that's not really how the fight went. And for Francis, here's another X factor. You talk about how he doesn't train with Cyril Gane anymore. He did train a little bit with Teddy Atlas. Now, I'm not exactly sure how long he trained with him, but just training with him for a little bit is probably going to help your boxing, and just having him in sort of your camp will help you out.
What about having Black Cobra striking systems, Dewey Cooper in the corner?
I don't know if Dewey Cooper helped out as much as Teddy Atlas. I mean, Teddy Atlas helped Povetkin win a heavyweight title. Anyways, I think Francis Ngannou is coming into this fight as a different fighter, and I do like everything that he said leading up to this fight. Before Anthony Pettis fought Alex Morono, I had to hear him say he became a new fighter. It was something I had in the back of my head. And he did. He actually did a whole interview with Ariel Helwani talking about how the mental side of his game wasn't there, and he's really been working on it. And after he did kind of get his mind right, that's when everything else...
Zahabi did the exact same thing before he fought Draco Rodriguez.
Exactly.
It was, I've been reading books on psychology, working with a sports psychologist, and my mentality for this fight is perfect. Sometimes you hear it and it's not overly convincing, but I also do like that.
Oh, yeah, and I do think people are now starting to realize that once you kind of get... The more locked in you are, the better you're going to be. Look at The Last Dance. Like, Michael Jordan had to find a reason to want to win his 6th title. So he just look at some random guy on the other bench and be like, I'm going to drop 60 on him tonight. You have to find motivation in different ways. And for Francis, going into that first title fight, we'll have knocked everyone out in a minute. Why is this going to be any different? Then you have that really hard fight. Now we're seeing him starting to defend takedowns, and that's what the really important key is in this fight, where it's not just like Francis Ngannou's going in there and he seems hesitant. He's letting his hands go. He's not as worried about the takedown attempt, and I think that's the best version of Francis. I think Stipe Miocic can beat any single man on this planet in a fist fight. I think when Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury had their dumb 2-fight deal, because boxing's stupid even though I like it, they can't say at the end of the night that, oh, this is the baddest man alive, because they're not. If they ever fought Stipe Miocic, that fight would last 30 seconds. He'd take them down and beat the brakes off them. This is a hard fight, though, and I do think this new version of Francis... Listen, we have a Francis who hasn't taken any damage since that first Stipe fight. You have Stipe, who's fought another one of the greatest fighters of all time 3 times since the first time he fought Francis, and... Yeah, he beat DC twice, but that second fight is a hard fight, and so is the third fight. It's not like you just ran over DC twice. Like, they were long, hard, drawn-out fights. It would make me happy to see Stipe Miocic win this fight and retire and just kind of go off into the sunset. You've done everything you can do in the sport. You're the greatest heavyweight of all time. They should put where LeBron's banner was in Cleveland and him throwing the chalk. They should take that down. I guess it's probably not there anymore. And they should put up a big banner of Stipe Miocic holding that heavyweight title, because he means a lot to the city of Cleveland, especially in their sports. I just think Francis Ngannou's got it. I think he's in the right mental state. The fact that he hasn't taken damage in a long time is important. And if he can just defend 1 or 2 takedowns in this fight, I think he'll be able to get the knockout win.
Matt, if we have a look at Fight Night Picks in the YouTube comment section, or community section rather, this is where it gets interesting. I threw it out there. Who's going to get the win between these two guys? 1,400 total votes, 65% Miocic, 35% Ngannou. And let's go down through some of the comments, Matt. I mean, Superfan going with Stipe, Akash Deepati, saying, honestly, think he's improved a bunch. There's a lot of good comments out here. David S. going with Stipe. There's a lot of people going with him. Vicente the GOAT saying Francis by brutal knockout.
That wasn't
70-30 Stiopic. Can't for the life of me figure out why people want Ngannou as champ. Most meat and potatoes fighter on the roster skill-wise. A lot of people saying he doesn't have any skills. He's made his way up to the number 1 ranked heavyweight to contend for the title against Miocic. If you look at the odds, Francis opened a -225 favorite. He's a -124 right now. So, 101 point change in those odds. Miocic opened +190, now at a +100. I bet that by the time of the fight, Miocic is probably the favorite in this one. And it gets really tricky. I mean, with the votes, if you go over on Tapology, maybe they have a little bit more. Well, they don't. 1,300, 57% Miocic, 43% Ngannou. Just about all the polls out there are pretty close, so it is a pretty decisive fight.
It is. Now...
Divisive.
There you go. So for the odds on Francis, again, these odds probably are going to be even by the time of the fight. Maybe Stipe slight favorite, maybe Francis slight favorite, but we'll just call them even for the time being. Just... Here's the thing. Francis can't win any other way by knockout. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Like, I don't think Francis can win a decision against Stipe.
What about by submission?
I don't think he can do that either. His only submission win in the UFC was against Anthony Freight Train Hamilton, who
win some, you lose some. Freight Train
exactly
Hamilton.
a guy whose name we only remember because of how poor his UFC ride went. And the way he was able to get that Kimura was he had Hamilton up against the cage, didn't really know what to do, grabbed an arm and just wrenched on it. It was nice, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't a technical submission as much as just a brute force submission. And last point on submissions, I guess, for both guys. There's a point in their first fight where Stipe has side control. I'm going to call it side control, but it isn't. He's basically standing on his knees, if you will, just punching the ground as Francis lays there. There's nothing holding Francis down. If he wants to get up, he could sit up like The Undertaker. I think Stipe is a good wrestler. I worry about his grappling side a little bit. I think if Francis, again, can defend some takedowns, I think if Francis even has a basic knowledge of get-ups, he should be able to get back up to his feet at some point. Stipe, we saw, go back to the Mark Hunt fight, he does a much better job of kind of breaking down his base over and over again and really just wearing on Mark Hunt. But Mark Hunt's grappling is an absolute 0, whereas Francis Ngannou is at least a 0.5 out of 10. So I do think if Ngannou, again, I need to see some takedown defense. And this is also going to be a weird thing. If Stipe weighs under 145 pounds, I think
145?
Sorry, goodness, then he'll probably be dead. If he weighs under 245, I like his chances more, but I do think Francis is going to win inside the distance. And again, the odds for inside the distance, he's a plus 100. If you're going to bet on Francis at all, there's no reason not to say inside the distance, because I really doubt he's going to outlast the heavyweight who has the best cardio of all time.
So you're going with Cameroon's Francis Ngannou.
Inside the distance.
I have a really tough time with this one, because again, you've seen what happened, but it's been a long time since then. It's been 2 years and 8 months since Stipe fought Cormier for the first time. It's been 3 years and 2 months since these two guys squared off. So for Stipe, the injuries, the layoffs, he's 38. It's not like Ngannou's a young guy. Like, he's 34 coming into this one. Almost 35. The miles, again, you lose the decision to Miocic. You lose to Derek Lewis, and then you lose early on in your career. So it's not like, he's taken a ton of damage in his fights. He's the one that's really putting on the damage, Darren Elkins. I have such a hard time with this one. It's such a question mark kicks on a Saturday, but I'm also going with Francis Ngannou. And listen, people are going to be so mad in the comments section. Let me hear it. But listen, I consider Stipe the greatest heavyweight of all time as well. I don't think it's a far-fetched thing to say. I think there's a time and place for Fedor, and Stipe just kind of took over that crown, and that's fine. Listen, titles pass hands, so do GOAT conversations. Look at Kamaru Usman. GSP, Kamaru Usman.
Not even close yet.
See what happens. But, yeah, I'm ultimately going with Cameroon's Francis Ngannou. I think, again, the changes in the game plan, the mindset's a huge deal. And if we're at least talking about it, we've overcome it, I really do like Francis Ngannou in this fight as well. It should be a great fight. We're both going with and new. And if you dislike it, you dislike it. But hey, we did our best to try and preview the fight for you. Maybe you don't like the pick, but maybe you like the analysis. And we're really looking forward to this weekend's card. We have question mark kicks 2 hours before the prelims. We also have our fight companion live for UFC 260. We usually start about 5 minutes before the pay-per-view. You can hang out with us, and you can call us donkeys if Stipe Miocic wins. That'll be absolutely fine with me. Hopefully everybody enjoys their week. Enjoy the fights. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. As there changes, maybe we have Burchak fighting, maybe we have Morales, Young, who knows? Just keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it.